Okay. All right. Good morning. Let's come to order and go on the record. I am Commissioner Tanola D. Brown Bland with the North Carolina Utilities Commission and the presiding commissioner for this hearing. With me this morning by remote means are Commissioners Jeffrey A. Hughes and Floyd B. McKissick Jr. I now call for hearing docket number G-5 sub 635, which is in the matter of application of Public Service Company of North Carolina, Inc. for annual review of gas costs pursuant to GS 62-133.4C and Commission Rule R1-17 Case 6. GS 62-133.4 authorizes gas cost adjustment proceedings for natural gas local distribution companies. Subsection C of the statute provides that the Utilities Commission shall conduct annual review proceedings to compare each natural gas utility's prudently incurred costs with costs actually recovered from all the utilities customers served during the test period. Commission Rule R1-17K6 prescribes the procedures for annual reviews of natural gas costs. On June 1st, 2021, Public Service Company of North Carolina, Inc., doing business as Dominion Energy North Carolina, hereafter PSNC or the company, filed the direct testimony and exhibits of witnesses Rose M. Jackson and Glory J. Creel regarding the company's actual gas costs for the 12-month test period ended March 31st, 2021. On June 7th, 2021, the Commission issued an order scheduling hearing requiring filing of testimony, establishing discovery guidelines, and requiring public notice. The order scheduled a hearing for this date and time, Tuesday, August the 10th, 2021, at 10 a.m. by remote means using the WebEx platform. On July 9th, 2021, Haw River Assembly filed a petition to intervene, which was granted by the Commission by an order issued July 19, 2021. On July 26, 2021, the public staff filed the testimony and appendices of witnesses Sean L. Dorgan, Neha R. Patel, and Julie G. Perry. On July 26, 2021, Haw River Assembly filed the direct testimony and exhibits of Gregory M. Lander. Also on July 26, 2021, all parties filed statements of consent to holding this hearing by remote means. On July 29, 2021, PSNC filed a motion to strike the direct testimony and exhibits of Gregory M. Lander and requested expedited treatment. On July 30th, 2021, PSNC filed affidavits of publication of public notice of hearing. And on August 2nd, 2021, Haw River Assembly filed its response opposing PSNC's motion to strike. Also, Haw River Assembly filed a list of confidential potential cross-exam exhibits. On August 3rd, the Commission issued an order denying PSNC's motion to strike testimony. On August 3rd, 2021, PSNC and the public staff filed a joint motion to excuse witnesses. The rebuttal testimony of PSNC witness Jackson was filed on August 5th, 2021. And finally, on August 6, 2021, the Commission issued an order granting the joint motion to excuse PSNC witness Creel and all three public staff witnesses from attending the hearing and directing that their testimony, the testimony of the excused witnesses and their exhibits be admitted into evidence at this hearing. Now, in compliance with the requirement of Chapter 163A of the State Government Ethics Act, I remind the members of the Commission of our responsibility to avoid conflicts of interest, and I inquire whether any member has a conflict of interest with respect to the matter before us this morning. Let the record reflect that no conflicts have been identified. And I now call for appearances of counsel, beginning with Public Service or PSNC.
Good morning, Presiding Commissioner Brown Bland, Commissioner McKissick, Commissioner Hughes. I'm Mary Lynn Grigg with the law firm of McGuire Woods, appearing on behalf of the company.
Good morning. Public staff.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm Gina Holt with Public Staff here on behalf of the using and consuming public.
All right. And High River Assembly.
Good morning, Presiding Commissioner Brown Bland. This is David Neal, the Southern Environmental Law Center, appearing this morning on behalf of the Haw River Assembly.
All right.
Commissioner Brown Bland, we also have Ms. Kristen Athens is appearing on behalf of the company as well.
Kristen Athens.
Yes, ma'am, from McGuire Woods.
All right. Good morning, Ms. Athens.
Good morning, Commissioner.
All right. Before we get started, are there preliminary matters that need to be addressed before we start?
Good morning, Presiding Commissioner Brown Bland. This is David Neal again. Just pursuant to the Commission's order, I just wanted to alert the Commission that the confidential cross-examination exhibits that we intend to use, I'm not sure what procedure the Commission wants to follow for introducing those exhibits, for how the Commission would go into closed session.
All right. Do we need to are you going to be eliciting testimony where we need to bring out the confidential materials?
My intention is to introduce the two confidential exhibits in cross-examination of company witness Jackson, and I do not know what material on those exhibits is considered confidential, so in an abundance of caution, I'm seeking guidance on how to proceed.
All right. Does Ms. Grigg have anything to add about the confidential nature of the proposed exhibits?
Just to note, Commissioner Brown Bland, that I have confirmed with the company that that is sensitive operating information and needs to be treated confidentially. I'm sorry for the inconvenience.
Oh, that's all right. Did we secure, I'm not aware that we secured a confidential line. Did we do that? Anyone? Did the company do that?
No, ma'am, I'm sorry, we did not.
Is someone at for the company able to get us a number while we proceed?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, we would
You
most
can
certainly
ask
be happy
someone
to do that.
to do that, and then I would request that you email or have someone email that number to me and to the court reporter, and we'll make sure
Yes,
it gets
ma'am.
to everybody else.
We'll do that
If
right
you
now.
could do that before.
Excuse me.
Mr. Neal, do you need to get to that matter at the front end of your cross-examination?
I think it would make the most sense to do it at the front end because it's foundational.
Okay, then we might, when we get there, which will be just a few minutes, we might take a brief recess until Ms. Grigg can help us get that number.
Thank you for your
Madam
help.
Court Reporter.
Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry to interrupt. My email was not on this computer, so if you could text it.
I'll make sure you get it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Ms. Grigg, it might be helpful if you confirm when it's sent. Just I'll be looking for it, but just in case.
Yes, ma'am, we will do so. Our practice assistant is going to be sending that momentarily. So if you'd like, we could call Ms. Jackson and have her provide her summary of her testimony, and while that email is heading down Fayetteville Street.
All right, and that but just a moment, we got a little bit more to take care of. So other than that, Mr. Neal, is that take care of your preliminary matters?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much.
All right. And Ms. Holt, did any public witnesses sign up for the public witness hearing portion of the hearing this morning?
No public witnesses have signed up.
All right. So the record will reflect that we inquired and there were no public witnesses wishing to testify this morning. All right, Ms. Grigg, we will let you get Ms. Jackson on the stand virtually.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Brown Bland. Psnc calls Ms. Rose M. Jackson to the stand.
All right, Ms. Jackson, Do you solemnly affirm that the testimony you're about to give should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right, Ms. Grigg.
Thank you. Good morning, Ms. Jackson.
Good morning.
Will you please state your name and business address for the record?
My name is Rose M. Jackson, and my business address is 220 Operation Way, Casey, South Carolina.
By whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed by Dominion Energy Services Incorporated as the Director of Gas Supply Services.
Did you cause to be pre-filed in this docket on June 1st, 2021, direct testimony in question or answer form consisting of 18 pages and 3 exhibits, of which attachment to Exhibit 2 was confidential?
Yes, ma'am.
Are there any corrections you would like to make to your testimony at this time?
No, ma'am.
If I ask you the questions in your direct testimony today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you have a summary of your testimony?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
Would you please provide it now to the commission?
Good morning, Commissioners. I discussed in my testimony the gas supply policies and procedures of Psnc, which does business as Dominion Energy North Carolina. The purpose of my testimony is to demonstrate that all Psnc gas costs were prudently incurred during the review period ended March 31, 2021, and therefore meet the requirement for recovery. Psnc's system and its gas supply procurement policy are designed to serve firm customers reliably on a design day. In providing sales service, the company must acquire supplies of natural gas and arrange for their delivery to Psnc's system. The most appropriate description of Psnc's procurement policy has been and continues to be a best cost supply strategy. This strategy is based on 3 primary criteria: supply security, operational flexibility, and the cost of gas. Psnc is committed to acquiring cost-effective supplies of natural gas while maintaining the necessary security and flexibility to serve our customers. Psnc acquires capacity to meet its customers' demand. Psnc's design day demand forecast projects firm customer load and is used to determine total asset needs. This forecast is updated annually, and capacity alternatives are evaluated on an ongoing basis. If needed, Psnc secures incremental transportation and/or storage capacity to meet the growth requirements of its firm sales customers, consistent with its best cost strategy. To acquire long-term expansion capacity precisely in balance with customer needs is impossible due to many external factors beyond the company's control. In assessing the type of resources needed to meet its design day demand, Psnc attempts to minimize the per unit delivered gas costs. This analysis incorporates any transportation charges, storage costs, and supplier reservation fees required to deliver gas to Psnc's system, as well as the reliability and timing of new services. Psnc also utilizes a hedging program to help mitigate natural gas price volatility at a reasonable cost. The hedging program meets its objective by using financial instruments such as call options or futures. In conclusion, it is my opinion that all of Psnc's gas costs were prudently incurred under its gas supply acquisition policy, and I respectfully request that these costs be approved. This concludes my summary.
Thank you. Commissioner Brown-Bland, I move that Ms. Jackson's direct testimony be copied into the record as if given orally from the stand, and that her 3 exhibits be marked for identification as pre-filed with the attachment to Exhibit 2 containing confidential information continue to be protected as such.
That motion is granted as counsel expressed it.
Thank you very much. And I understand that my practice assistant is working on getting that dial-in information sent to you, and it should be coming your way momentarily, and I apologize for any delay.
Oh, it's understandable at this point. We're ready for all contingencies, apparently. All
Yes,
right,
ma'am.
so let's stand in recess. And what I will have everyone do once we all have the number is mute your WebEx platform and also stop your video at the time when we go over. Mr. McCoy, who's the host for our call, he'll maintain this call, and we will all convene on the confidential conference line. All of us who are authorized to be privy to the confidential information. I think is that all of us, Ms. Grigg?
Yes, ma'am. It should be all counsel have signed NDAs and the witnesses have as well.
All right, and our commission staff.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so we will stand in recess, and I am, but sit tight, and I'll come back and I'll indicate when we have the number, and I'll try to make sure everyone has it. If your assistant can email to as many as she can, like Mr. Neal.
Yes, and Ms. Holt.
Yes, that would be helpful.
Yes, I will go check on that right this moment.
All right, we stand in recess.
Thank you.
Stand by, please.
Ms. Athens, would you please mute your video?
Yes, I'm
Thank you.
getting technical help on trying to figure out how to turn it off, and then I will.
Thank you.
Madam Court Reporter, are you back with me?
Yes,
Would it
ma'am.
be better for us to call in, Mary Lynn, since there's an echo because we're on the other WebEx?
Right. I think it will.
All right.
I'll do that.
So everyone, would everyone put their cameras back on just so I know you're hearing me? Slowly but surely. Commissioner Hughes, Ms. Holt.
I'm calling in. I had logged in, so I didn't want to be on both at the same time. So I'm calling in to the second one.
All right, so who still needs the number? Anybody didn't get the number? I'm gonna make sure you get it.
Commissioner Brown Bland, I don't think I've gotten an email with the number.
All right.
If
I'll
an
make
email is
sure.
being sent out, check it now. I did not know it already been
One may
sent.
not have been sent to you. That's why I'm just
Oh.
making sure who needs it, and I'll send it. Commissioner Hughes has it, apparently.
If you could send it to me, Commissioner Brown Bland, that'd be great. I haven't checked my email yet. It may be there, but better safe than sorry.
Witness Jackson and Witness Lander, you have the number for the confidential call-in?
Yes, ma'am.
Lander on the line, thank you.
All right, so what I want to make you aware of, it's been sent out, or what I received in any case, is as a WebEx, and we want to maintain this current WebEx that we're on, so do not leave this WebEx. Use the call-in number and the access code. This is going to be by telephone only. All right? So, Neil, are we ready to go over to the confidential session?
Yes, ma'am.
Everybody's able to follow me over there. Ms. Holt, did you come back? She might be over there.
I will call in now from a landline.
I will make sure. All right, everyone, stop
Commissioner
your.
Brown Bland,
Yes,
I have not received the number, I don't believe.
I'm getting ready to send it to you.
Okay. All right.
All right, and so everyone, stop your video on this call and mute. Mr. McCoy? I don't know if he's still with us, but he.
Yes.
All right, good. We're all coming back. We kept the
Okay.
WebEx up.
Commissioner Brown Bland,
Yes.
this is Lynn Green. I wanted to suggest that maybe we should save that confidential line in place in the event that PSNC may have some questions to Mr. Lander that might involve confidential information, maybe acquire with counsel about that.
I believe we have the line. It came in, it's available till 2 o'clock. So is that
Okay.
correct, Mr. Grigg? Is it still available if we need to go back? You're muted.
Yes, ma'am, that should be available until 2 o'clock, and we can extend that if necessary.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
So are we ready to go back on the record? Double checking. All right. Let's go back on the record. We're coming out of the confidential session back to the public session. All right, Mr. Neal, cross-examination continues with you, non-confidential.
Thank you, Commissioner Brown Bland. Ms. Jackson, can you hear me okay now that we're back on the WebEx?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So you would agree that I'm going to refer, I guess, to Jackson Direct Exhibit 1 again, which is part of your pre-filed testimony.
Yes, sir.
You list as at the top line there under contracted capacity Transco FT. Is that firm's transportation?
Yes, sir.
And that's again roughly 390,000 decatherms a day of capacity. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And you would agree that Transco has a FERC approved tariff with a listing of maximum rates by rate schedule. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And you would agree that some of your Transco capacity contracts are for decatherms that are from Transco Zone 2 to Transco Zone 5. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And for daily reservation rates on Transco from Zone 2 to Zone 5, do you recall the published maximum reservation non-incremental rate? It's approximately 47 cents per decatherm per day. Is that right?
I don't recall the exact dollar amount. I apologize.
And again, I believe that your colleague in Creel Exhibit 1, Schedule 5, included the various Transco rates that were effective as of June 1st during the test period. Does that sound familiar?
I'm pulling it up right as we speak.
And I believe, again,
Okay, yes, sir, I have it. I have it.
And so you would agree that if we wanted to go and see what those prices are, that they've been listed in, at least as of June 1st, 2020, they've been listed there on Creel Exhibit 1, Schedule 5.
For the 12 months, it would be as of March 31st. Yes, sir.
And again, that's roughly 47 cents per decatherm.
For Zone 2 to Zone 5,
Yes, ma'am.
I'm showing 58 cents if I'm reading this correctly.
Well, again, I'm looking at the second part of Schedule 5.
46.9. Yes, sir. Okay.
Where I think it's effective June 1st, 2020.
Yes, sir. Okay. I see it now.
And so that means that PSNC pays, again, about 47 cents for every Zone 2 to Zone 5 reserve decatherm every day of the year. Isn't that right? For as long as that price is in effect.
Right. For the volumes that we have from Zone 2 to Zone 5, that would be correct.
And similarly, you would agree that some of the Transco capacity is for decatherms from Transco Zone 4 to Zone 5.
Yes, sir.
And similarly, we could look at Creel Exhibit 1, Schedule 5 to see what the price is for those decatherms, and that's, again, roughly 38 cents. Isn't that right?
Yes, sir.
All right. That is all the cross I have until rebuttal. Thank you, Commissioner Brown-Bland.
All right. Is there any cross from the public staff?
No cross.
Ms. Grigg, is there redirect?
Yes, ma'am. I just have a couple of brief questions on redirect. Ms. Jackson, when Mr. Neal was asking you questions about HRA Cross Exhibit 1, you stated that short-term solutions were more difficult to achieve because of constrained pipeline capacity. Do you recall that statement as I paraphrased it?
Yes, ma'am.
Could you
Ms.
please?
Grigg, Ms. Grigg, is that the confidential exhibit?
Yes, ma'am. I'm not going to ask for any confidential information.
All right, just clearing it for the record. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. I appreciate you asking, but I'm not going to ask her to divulge anything that's confidential. Could you please elaborate, Ms. Jackson, on how short-term solutions are more difficult to access because of constrained pipeline capacity?
Yes, ma'am. As demand grows throughout the U.S. and it continues to do so for natural gas usage, and the amount of pipeline capacity that's coming into the same marketplace is longer term. In the past, we have used, I would say 5 to 7 years ago, we would use 3 years as an estimated timeline from the date that a pipeline project pre-filed at FERC to the time that the project would come into service. And in today's world, we are estimating 7+ years for a pipeline project to be pre-filed and go into service. And it's been very difficult to estimate just how long it might take. And it's not related to the FERC process, it's related to litigation associated with these projects.
So if you have a very cold period, there may be natural gas located somewhere, but you may or may not be able to access it. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. If you look at the Marcellus region, for example, that is plentiful with shale deposits for natural gas. The problem that we've had is that there are fewer projects that were originally planned that transport that gas from the Marcellus region to, let's say, our market in the Southeast. And so when you hit these time frames, such as the polar vortex event that we actually incurred in 2014 and 2018, gas prices the market price of gas ended up being $150 a decatherm. So that is the key component of reliability, is ensuring that you have a firm transportation resource that will enable you to deliver gas to our firm customers.
Ms. Grigg, you're on mute.
Yes, ma'am. So when Mr. Neal was asking you questions about Exhibit 1, you said that assumes all assets are available, correct?
Yes, ma'am, at full capacity. Because what we do, and I can use my Exhibit 1 that's not confidential, that's attached to my direct testimony. What it does here is it compares the total design day demand, which is 1 day, to the assets that we have currently contracted for to meet on that day. But let's take, for instance, Pine Needle, which is an LNG facility that we contract for with Transco. If the design day occurs on November 1st, then that full capacity would be available. However, to my knowledge, we haven't hit a design day on November 1st. Historically, our cold weather, we encounter that in January, February timeframe. So as the winter season progresses, we're going to pull volumes, maybe not at that maximum amount, but we're going to pull volumes out of Pine Needle so that the total number of days and volumes may not be available there when we hit a design day. And that is the value of year-round capacity. It allows us to fill in the holes, if you will, if we've utilized all of our peaking assets on a given day, and the design day does occur later in the winter season.
Thank you. So if I understand you correctly, if you have a polar vortex in February, your available capacity will likely or may not look like this cross exhibit 1. Is that
Exactly.
correct?
Yes, ma'am. This assumes that all the assets are there at full capacity.
Thank you. Mr. Neal asked you some questions about if you have MVP in 2023 capacity in 2023 or 2024, for example, what Exhibit 1 looks like. Do you recall those questions?
Yes, ma'am.
If the company does at any point in time have excess capacity for whatever reason, what does it do with excess capacity?
We go into the marketplace and we try to optimize those assets as secondary market transactions, which means that we would retain the contractual rights for those assets, but we may do a short-term capacity release, if you will. So as MVP, let's assume that MVP comes online and we'll have reserve margin much greater than our less than 1% reserve margin that we have today, then we would go into the marketplace and try to place that capacity that we wouldn't need to utilize on a seasonal basis and on a daily basis. Because if we're forecasting, let's say, lower than normal demand, we try to place those unutilized assets on a daily basis as well.
And that's a benefit to the customers?
Yes, ma'am. They receive 75% of secondary market transaction proceeds back as a credit to the cost of gas.
Thank you. I don't have any further questions for Ms. Jackson.
All right. Are there questions from the commissioners? Commissioner Hughes and Commissioner McKissick.
I have no questions.
All right. Ms. Jackson, I have just a couple questions for you, just for clarification for myself.
Yes, ma'am.
On page 5 of your direct testimony, you mentioned there that around line 7, in furtherance of the company's sustainability initiative, the company recently began asking that the bids include the supplier's net zero goals or strategies. Have you, when you say recently, when is recently? And I ask that just to say, have you begun receiving that requested info in the bids?
Yes, ma'am. We included that request for information as part of our annual RFP, our RFPs in January for our annual supply. So we did receive some information back. We issued the RFP to roughly 60 suppliers. 16 of those responded with 107 offers, which is roughly a 27% participation rate. And of those 16, 4 of those sent in RSG or net zero responses to help us understand what their long-term strategies are.
And from the company's point of view, can you shed any light at this point on kind of what that looks like? Nothing specific or confidential, but what that looks like, what you would be expecting from this information?
I think that our industry as a whole is looking at the opportunity to reduce methane emissions and move towards a net zero carbon goal. However, trying to figure out how to compare each offer on an apples to apples basis is where we've got to get to. So what standard are we going to use and how are we going to apply that going forward is what we're working on. We have become members of a coalition. We participate in both One Future and Next Generation Natural Gas, where we're trying to figure out as LDCs, how do we take in this information, process it, and compare it so we know what we're comparing and the cost that we're comparing.
Is your industry, is that an indication that your industry is mostly at a similar level? Is anyone out to your knowledge ahead of where you are at this point?
We're in the process of evaluating peer companies as well, so I should have more information to report on that next year. But I think we're very much so similarly situated, if not ahead of some other LDCs that are comparable to us.
All right, thank you. And then on page 8 of your direct, you mentioned there the term, the short-term peaking services. Is that just the supply capacity, or is the use of word services there indicate more? What is indicated by short-term peaking
The short-term
services?
peaking services is a temporary shortfall in assets on lines 10 and 11. That was what, I'm sorry, regarding the 40,000 decatherms of the delivered winter service.
And so that's just about the gas, the capacity?
It's actually a delivered service, so it combines the supply and the transportation.
All right, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
And now, has anything that occurred in Texas, in any of the information you've heard since that event happened back in February of this year, 2021, has anything that you learned there, have knowledge of, caused any changes or adjustments in supply and capacity planning for the country?
I think it reiterated some of the same things that we've been talking about with the commission and with public staff over the last few years. The fact that we are served from one interstate pipeline, that we do not have a secondary source. There's no redundancy, if you will. Also, it has become a clear indication that I appreciate the regulatory structure that we're in, that our commission has been very supportive of the acquisition of firm transportation to ensure reliable service to our firm customers. If you look at the Texas market and the fact that they are completely unbundled, what that regulatory structure does not encourage is it doesn't encourage contracting for firm transportation. It doesn't encourage energy providers to spend sufficient funds on O&M cost or operation and maintenance to support their facilities, because they are competing on a daily basis to sell energy. And therefore, when you hit these colder than normal, or in their case, a polar vortex event, a 1 in 100 year weather event, that's when you see where there's a problem with the deregulated marketplace with regards to trying to take the cheapest way out, if you will, or the lowest cost alternative all the time. They don't focus on reliability. They're purely focused on what is the least cost path to serve our customers.
All right, and I ask about supply and capacity. If you know, and I take it, I ask that because I believe that's your area that you work in. But if you know, has the Texas experience and the lessons learned, etc., resulted in any operational changes?
Because of the polar vortex events that we encountered in 2014 and 2018, I think that we had done an assessment during those time periods. And once again, because we are in a regulated regulatory structure, we are required to serve our firm customers every day of the year. So as part of this annual process, we work with public staff and we work with the commission to make sure that y'all properly evaluate the assets that we have and what our firm demand is going to be. We're very blessed to live in an area where we have positive growth. I deal with my counterparts throughout the U.S. and that's not necessarily true. They have decreasing growth or demand on their system. So I think what it tells me is we need to ensure that our customers can be served, not just on normal weather conditions, but in these polar vortex or much colder than normal events. And reliability is a huge concern, not just what the cost of gas is, but can you get the gas when you need it?
And finally, my last question just has to do with hedging. times are changing, weather-wise and economically. And so your testimony, your direct testimony, you indicate there have been no changes made to the hedging program. From where you sit today, are you foreseeing or expecting the need for any change in the hedging program?
I think where we sit today is a good balance between the cost of a financial hedging program, that coupled with our physical hedging through our interstate storage and our own system storage at the Cary LNG plant, and the deferred gas accounting mechanism that we have. All of those work together to mitigate volatility to our customers. And I think our hedging program has been able to add to that reduction of volatility. However, if you look in my testimony, as I state, the financial hedging program would not have helped us in a Texas polar vortex event, because that was a short-term event around the middle of the month, right around February 14th. And so the financial hedging models look at the upcoming month. And what did help us, though, was we were able to dispatch our physical storages on the interstate pipelines, and we were able to avoid having to buy those much higher daily market prices of gas during that time period.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Jackson. Are there questions on the commission's questions, starting with Haw River?
Well, before you do that, Commissioner Brown, can I ask, I know I said I wasn't going to ask a question, but could I ask a follow-up question based on your questions?
We haven't had enough things go wrong this morning.
Well,
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
No.
Go,
We're going to
Commissioner
have time
Hughes.
for rebuttal. The question I have could easily be asked on rebuttal, so I'll just
No, go ahead. Go ahead. I was just teasing.
Well, it's just about the concept of best cost, which is mentioned quite a bit both in your testimony and some of the other interveners' testimonies. If I understand the concept, it's essentially, at least in my mind, including the cost of reliability underneath its sort of definition of cost. So whereas
Yes,
least cost traditionally only looks at sort of a utility financial cost. So in terms of how you approach that, has the company done any efforts to actually estimate the cost of a lack of reliability? So something that occurred in Texas, is there an effort to say, well, if you go down for one of these 2-hour periods that are on, that we've been talking about, what will be the cost to your customers? So is that been quantified at all? And is there any kind of risk analysis based on that is going on?
Yes, sir, Commissioner Hughes, we look at the penalties associated with non-delivery. So in the event that our customers use gas and we haven't delivered enough supply, then those penalties are $50 a decatherm plus the cost of gas. But then if you look at, for instance, at the Texas polar vortex event, if you just take 250,000 decatherms, which is the number of incremental deliverability that the MVP project will provide Psnc with, on one day, that 250,000 decatherms, if we had been on the market trying to buy delivered gas at $400 a decatherm, that would have been $100 million.
And I appreciate that answer, but my question was a little bit different, because in Texas, they just couldn't do it. And there was actual times where they could not supply the gas, and the gas was not supplied. Have you done any calculations about the alternative of not spending the money you just described and having, I mean, I know you don't want to do this, but just saying we can't do it, and figuring out what that would cost your customers in terms of lost productivity, just human hardship, however you want to present it?
Well, it would be loss of heat to homes is what we're most concerned with. And so if you take, for instance, the Texas polar vortex event, while the $400 per decatherm, if we go the least cost route, then we would assume we can go out on the market every day, as Mr. Lander would suggest, and find delivered gas on a daily basis. So we would be in the marketplace paying that $400 a decatherm. The other option that he put forth in his direct testimony was to rely on satellite LNG facilities that are on the back of tractor trailers that can go out to different regions within our service territory. And we would truck in LNG to be vaporized on satellite LNG facilities. However, if you just take this upcoming winter season, the 60,000 decatherms that we show as a shortfall for our design day, if you take the numbers in his analysis for trucking, we would be looking at using 45 to 71 truckloads of LNG in a coldest weather scenario. So number one, is the LNG going to be available? I would say probably not. The second one is even more problematic. Are the LNG tankers going to be available to deliver the LNG if we can find it? And the third thing is, will the road conditions, even if we could find the LNG supply, the trucks that could haul it, could it get to these remote areas such as in our Asheville region or even in the Raleigh area that experienced ice and snow? So that's, I think, when we say the difference between a hypothetical analysis and real world conditions, we have to be able to serve our customers during the worst weather scenarios, not just the best weather or the normal weather scenarios. And we have an obligation to serve.
Okay, I think you answered the question that your obligation to serve is your whole entire planning point. You don't have a scenario where you can even imagine not serving for 2 hours and having calculated what cost that would be for your customers. Just they don't have gas. They're in the dark. They don't produce things. I mean, it's an economic question, and I don't want to belabor it, but I was just curious if the company had ever done a survey of its customers, have ever looked at what it would cost 2 hours without gas going to.
Well, I think Commissioner Hughes, the one thing that's a little bit more difficult from a gas user standpoint rather than, let's say, an electric outage. With the electric outage, my power can go out for 2 hours and we don't have to, the electric company doesn't have to come to my house and relight anything in order for me to get get electric service again. But in the situation of natural gas consumption in a home, we would have to dispatch someone out to that home to relight their pilot light. So if you can imagine how many customers we could potentially use, it would be difficult to say it's only 2 hours that we might lose them, because it would be dependent upon how long it would take us to relight those pilot lights to get them back on gas.
Well, I appreciate it. This isn't the venue for me to keep going with this, but I would maybe in the future be interested in an estimate of the cost of dealing with this curtailment, like you just said. You know, how much would it cost the company to go out and relight? But for now, I'm satisfied with your answer. Thank you very much for humoring me, Commissioner Brown Bland and Ms. Rose. Thank you.
Ms. Jackson, just a little bit of a follow-up, I guess. Did the polar vortex that we experienced here in North Carolina and the company's experience, would that have shed any light on what Commissioner Hughes was asking about? Did you experience outages, or you didn't have outages, just people using in violation of their curtailment obligations?
Well, I want to point out something that we might be getting a little bit mixed up with what type of customers we're serving. Right. The only customers that we could curtail or interrupt are our interruptible industrial customers. The commercial and residential customers are served on firm rate schedules. Therefore, we don't have the ability to interrupt them for economic, so that they can have a lower rate or lower cost in exchange for interruptible service. And since our rate case in 2016, we have had much fewer curtailments of industrial customers, because what that change in our tariff that provided for the company to be able to issue operational orders, what it does is it allows the industrial interruptible customer to work with their pooler. And as long as the pooler can deliver sufficient supply to meet the demands of that interruptible customer, then they do not incur a penalty. and they can take the customers in their pool. If some customers are long and some customers are short, they can net those two together. Now, if that pooler and the industrial interruptible customer elect to curtail or to limit service, then they can do so. But it's not the only time the company now curtails interruptible customers on the industrial side is when we have a localized problem on the system, like let's say a low pressure problem, if you will.
And so during that polar vortex incident, the company's firm customers, residential, did not experience an outage, correct?
No, ma'am, we did not.
All right. Are there questions or commission's questions, starting with Haw River Assembly?
Thank you, Commissioner Brown-Bland. Just briefly, Ms. Jackson, in response to a question from Commissioner Brown-Bland, I believe you said that North Carolina is served by only one pipeline. Is that correct?
Psnc only interconnects with one pipeline. Yes, sir.
And I heard you to say that North Carolina is only served by one interstate pipeline. And just to be clear, that the Transco pipeline has three or four different main lines in parallel. Isn't that right?
But it's still one pipeline.
But actually what I'm trying to get across is that it is one maybe pipeline system, but there are multiple pipelines that serve Transco's system.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question.
So that Transco itself, the pipeline that moves through North Carolina, has at least three and in some places four main lines in parallel. Isn't that right?
Oh, you're talking about the physical infrastructure?
Yes.
Yes, sir, but I think the concern we would have is similar to what Colonial Pipeline encountered earlier this year. What if all of their pipelines were to be shut down?
Again, just the question was, do you agree that they have multiple pipelines as part of their system? Yes?
They have multiple lines as part of their overall interstate pipeline system.
And that pipeline system, the Transco system, is served from multiple different supply sources. Isn't that right?
That is correct.
Including some from the Marcellus Shale. Isn't that right?
They're beginning to have supply from that, and that's part of that bi-directional feed. So yes, sir, they have added some facilities that interconnect with that area.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have, Commissioner Brown-Bland.
All right, public staff, any questions on commission's questions?
I have no questions.
And PSNC?
No questions.
All right. Do you have any motions for me?
Yes, ma'am. I would like to move Jackson direct testimony and exhibits into the record.
All right, without objection, I believe the testimony is already in and the exhibits will be received and marked as they were identified when pre-filed.
Thank you.
And the what's confidential shall remain confidential.
And Commissioner Brown-Bland, we would move into admittance the two cross-examination exhibits that have been marked confidential, HRA Jackson confidential cross exhibits 1 and 2.
All right, without objections, those two exhibits will be received into evidence and will remain confidential. All right, Ms. Jackson, you are excused. Well, you have no, you're not, because I believe your counsel will bring you back on rebuttal. So stay on standby.
Thank you.
All right. Does the company have anything further?
Not at this time. Thank you.
All right.
I could, if you want me to, go ahead and at this point, I was going to wait until the end, but can move Ms. Glory Creel's testimony and exhibits into the record at this time.
Now would be a good time. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Brown-Bland would like to move into the record the direct testimony of Glory Creel, the 6 pages of direct testimony, and her 2 exhibits.
All right. Without objection, that motion will be allowed. and the testimony and exhibits of Glory J. Creel will be received into evidence with the exhibits identified as they were marked when pre-filed.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right. The public staff?
Yes, at this time, I'd like to move the testimony and appendices of the public staff witnesses. I move that the testimony of Neha R. Patel, consisting of 7 pages, be admitted into evidence, and that her appendix be identified as marked and admitted into evidence.
That motion will be allowed.
I move that the testimony of Sean L. Dorgan, consisting of 15 pages, be copied into the record and admitted into evidence, and that his appendix be identified as pre-marked and admitted into the evidence.
All right, without objection, that motion is also allowed.
I move that the testimony of Julie G. Perry, consisting of 6 pages, be copied into the record and admitted into evidence. And I move that Ms. Perry's appendix be identified as pre-marked and also admitted into evidence.
And without objection, that motion is also allowed. So those testimonies are received into the record and treated as if given orally from the stand. All right, so with that, the case is now with the High River.
Thank you. I would ask if Mr. Greg Lander could be sworn in.
All right, Mr. Lander, if you could come on camera. Mr. Lander, are you there?
I hope he's not having technical difficulties.
Are you able to check with him, Mr. Neal?
I'm trying to do that now.
I apologize.
There he is.
Yep.
All right, Mr. Lander, your counsel has called you to the stand, and let me give you the oath. Do you solemnly affirm that the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right, Mr. Neal, you're a witness.
Thank you. Mr. Lander, could you state your name, title, and business address for the record?
My name is Gregory M. Lander. I am president of Skipping Stone LLC. We're located at 83 Pine Street in Peabody, Mass. 01960.
Mr. Lander, on July 26, 2021, did you cause to be pre-filed in this docket, number G-5, sub 635, direct testimony consisting of 38 pages as well as 8 exhibits?
Indeed, yes.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your pre-filed direct testimony?
No, I do not.
If I asked you the same questions here today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
And do you have any changes or corrections to the exhibits to your direct testimony?
None of substance, no. There's one letter that's wrong, but it's not.
Okay. Commissioner Brown-Bland, I would move that Mr. Lander's pre-filed direct testimony be entered into the record and copied into the record as if given orally from the stand, and that Mr. Lander's exhibits be marked for identification as exhibits GML 1 through GML 8.
All right, that motion will be allowed, and Mr. Lander's pre-filed direct testimony is received into evidence, treated as if given orally from the witness stand, and the exhibits that were pre-filed will remain identified as they were marked when pre-filed.
Thank you. Mr. Lander, did you prepare a summary of your testimony?
I did.
Could you provide it to the commission at this time?
Sure, thank you. The purpose of my testimony is to present my all-in cost analysis of Public Service Company of North Carolina's, PSNC, or the company, acquisition of firm pipeline capacity in response to company witness Jackson's testimony regarding PSNC's precedent agreements with the Mountain Valley Pipeline MVP and MVP Southgate Pipeline. I reviewed the company's application materials, its responses to data requests, and publicly available information about the MVP and MVP Southgate projects. I also offered the all-in cost analysis framework as an alternative to the best cost supply strategy described by company witness Jackson. I performed an all-in cost analysis of PSNC's MVP and MVP Southgate capacity and reached the following conclusions. First, PSNC projects increasing winter peak demand from its customers. Because its projected increase in demand is both modest and of short duration, only occurring for a few hours on the coldest days in the winter, PSNC's purchase of year-round firm capacity on MVP and MVP Southgate projects is an extremely expensive solution. The total fixed cost of this capacity is over $120 million a year, equal to an estimated 2022-2023 all-in cost of $324.22, just fixed cost, for each decatherm of gas estimated to actually be used by PSNC's customers through the incremental capacity represented by the MVP Southgate contracts. This enormous per unit cost of gas actually projected to be used is because the duration of the demand that PSNC experiences for its rate-paying sales customers, i.e. their load by day sorted from highest to lowest, makes such capacity very underutilized, especially relative to its annual cost. Notably, PSNC does not consider load duration as a factor in its capacity procurement process. Second, PSNC has other alternatives available to meet its projected demand, including contracting directly with gas producers and marketers that own capacity on the existing Transco pipeline and able to deliver to PSNC. As referenced in PSNC's filing, the company already contracts with some of these types of companies to meet its winter peak demand. And my analysis shows that this merchant capacity will be sufficient to meet PSNC's demand projections until at least 2035. The all-in cost of gas delivered by merchants on the existing Transco system is likely substantially lower than the all-in cost, including gas cost, of PSNC's MVP and MVP Southgate capacity. PSNC's application provides no indication that the company has evaluated this or any other alternative option to identify the lowest cost resources for its customers. Third, PSNC's decision to contract for MVP Southgate will not only affect its firm gas customers, but also large commercial and industrial gas users that transport gas on the PSNC system, and electric ratepayers in North Carolina whose rates reflect changes in whose transport rates reflect changes in PSNC's fixed demand costs. In light of these conclusions, I recommend that the Commission put PSNC on notice in its final order in this case that the contracted capacity on the MVP and MVP Southgate pipelines is far in excess of PNC's demonstrated need, alerting the company now that it is at risk for not recovering the costs of its excess pipeline subscription will allow PSNC to take advantage of viable market alternatives for disposing of its MVP and MVP Southgate capacity to reduce the significant and unjustified costs.
Thank you. Commissioner Brown-Bland, Mr. Lander is available for cross-examination and questions from the Commission.
All right. Does the company have cross-examination?
No questions.
All right. Public staff, any cross-examination?
No questions.
All right. Any questions from the commission?
I have no questions. Pretty straightforward.
All right. Commissioner Hughes?
Just a quick question. Mr. Lander, were you listening in on my question to the last witness?
Yes.
So I essentially have the same question for you. You call yours an all-in cost analysis. I didn't see in your testimony any alternative for what would happen if service was curtailed to even sales customers at the household level. Is that some analysis that you have done or you've seen done anywhere?
Yes, I have. It's usually called LOLE, loss of load equivalent. It's done throughout the Northeast. I've seen it done in New Jersey, Massachusetts, New York, where they estimate for a certain level of load loss. Let's say they lose a neighborhood or a town. They then estimate what it would take to relight that area and what level of capacity loss that would entail. So if they lost 50,000 a day, what would be the load loss? And the typical tiering of that is the utility, when it's facing a load loss, you usually due to a local constraint, as mentioned by witness Jackson, will take off its biggest customers first, its interruptible customers, and then try to maintain maintain sufficient supply to the remaining firm customers, the remaining and only firm customers, so that the occurrence they generally plan for is either a 0.1%, meaning a once in 100 years occurrence, so that if the cost of avoiding the problem is more than I'm not going to say this correctly. They come up with the cost of preventing it has to be less than this percentage over some period of time, a loss of load equivalence. And I apologize for not having directly at the tip of my tongue the math. But one of the things that also is important to keep in mind, with respect to PSNC, they have a 500,000 a day typical winter peak load, and they plan for 800,000 typical design day. And you should ask them what their throughput is on a cold day, because one of the things you'll find is that somehow, with existing capacity on Transco being the only pipeline that serves PSNC, there's a tremendous amount of gas on every day over and above the firm sales load that PSNC serves that's getting to those customers with existing capacity. And so what we're talking about in the testimony that we're providing is that, contrary to the view that, well, rely entirely on LNG or entirely reliably on this, it's to maintain your all of the above and add to your all of the above approach, meaning you have year-round capacity sufficient, you have storage and incremental winter period capacity that will last and be useful for 10 to 60 days. And so that would mean looking at that incremental, that additional existing storage and winter period capacity, that you'd have to have between 10 and 60 design days in a year to have used up that resource. And so stating that you have it on November 1st and you may not have it in February you'd have had to have 6 or 8 design days between November and February to not have enough in February based upon the very diligent plan that they have. And so when I looked at the plan they have and the demand that they have, I don't have any argument with the existing panoply of services and the mix of long-term, baseload, intermittent, and peaking resources. The thing that was mystifying to me, and those are resources that will cost between 38 and 60 cents, depending on their duration and whatnot, and whether you measure that over an annual basis or just over the duration of the service. Why you would add almost double your year-round capacity at rates 2 to 3 or 4 times existing capacity didn't make sense to me. And when you talk about mitigating that cost, with 75% going to ratepayers and 25% going to the company, the ratepayers start with 100% of $1.27 in a market that might get them in the secondary market between 10 and 30 cents. And so what costs $1.27 might have revenue of, say, 30 cents, and 25% of that goes to the company, which, you know, a quarter is 7.5 cents. And, you know, the ratepayers only have like a 25-cent reduction against $1.27 cost. And that, to me, doesn't make economic sense. And so the recommendation that we made was, if they feel, you know, they have to go through with this, or they want to go through with this, let them go through with it, put them on notice that any money they make in the secondary market on this, they get to keep, but the ratepayers don't pay for firm capacity on these projects that exceeds the projected peak day demand going out 2 to 3 years. And ratepayers will take that cost on, but the company should take on the rest of the cost unless they find a place to mitigate it. And there's lots of companies out there that didn't get ACP, Atlantic Coast capacity, that might take this off their hands, or take all of it off their hand and then turn around and sell the company just like they buy.
Commissioner Brown-Bland, excuse me for interrupting. Commissioner Brown-Bland, this is Mary Lynn Gregg. I think we've gone well beyond Commissioner Hughes's question into reciting the rest of Mr. Lander's testimony, so I will object at this point.
All right, Mr. Neal, do you have something to say?
Commissioner Hughes had a very broad question about reliability. I'd ask if this is responsive. I would ask, I guess, if Commissioner Hughes thinks this is responsive.
I'm satisfied now. I think we can move on. So.
All right, so we'll leave it there. Okay. So any other questions, Commissioner Hughes, Commissioner McKissick? All right, I had just one. Witness Lander, you call your analysis the all-in cost. Is that synonymous with or the same as a lease cost analysis?
No, it is not. What all-in cost does is primarily says, when you define a problem, you have a problem of a certain magnitude and you have a problem of a certain duration. And so when you're solving a problem of a magnitude and duration, you want to see what are the costs of solving that magnitude of problem over the duration. And so there are different sizes of solutions, and the size of the solution, what you should evaluate the solution against is, how does that solution fit against the magnitude and duration of the problem, as opposed to a problem, you have a solution, and it fits this problem. So what all-in cost does is it says, what's the cost of meeting this magnitude of demand? And then what is the cost of meeting this duration? So it's not a measure of least cost. It says, what is a cost comparison between solutions? So what all-in cost does is it enables comparison. It doesn't drive solutions. It allows a comparison of two different solutions to solve one problem. So the problem is defined, and there are multiple different solutions possible, and you evaluate between the solutions based upon the all-in cost analysis. Because if one all-in cost is $400 a decatherm and another all-in cost is 50, you say, 50 is cheaper than 400 if both solutions can solve the problem. And into both of those equations and analyses, you would bring reliability. Will the solution, with the correct O&M, with the correct training, with the correct execution, be a reliable solution? Because as Ms. Jackson has said, the gas has to be there when the gas is there. Like I say in my testimony, it's not good to have gas at noon when you need it at 7. You have to have the gas at 7 when you need it at 7. And so, unlike the electric business where the lights can go off and the lights go on, you really don't want that to happen in the gas business. You'd rather not have that happen unless the cost of not having that happen is so huge that you're willing to have a high risk, low frequency occurrence rather than a high cost permanent solution to a very low frequency event. But I'm not recommending that. I'm just saying all-in cost is used for comparison purposes. It doesn't drive the solution. It allows you to look at different ways of solving the same problem on a cost of meeting that problem basis.
Once you perform an all-in analysis, do the cost outcomes dictate the choice, or does discretion remain in your view?
So there's when you have to use a risk adjustment against the magnitude of difference. If something is 20 cents different, it becomes a matter of discretion and preference. If the difference between two solutions is 10 to 15 times, you've got to wonder, is under almost any circumstance, is that magnitude of difference justified? And so it's like it's a continuum. If the differences are small, discretion plays the day. Up to like even 2 to 3 times, discretion determines the outcome. When you get in the areas of 4 to 5, 6, and 7 times difference in cost, you've got to wonder whether that risk is something that whether the ratepayers should buy into that risk as opposed to the company buying into that risk. It's a question of who takes the risk.
All right.
Was that helpful?
Thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you for that. Are there questions on commission's questions, starting with the company?
No questions.
All right. Public staff?
No questions.
And Mr. Neal?
Just briefly, Commissioner Brown-Bland. Mr. Lander, in response to Commissioner Hughes' question about kind of interruptibility, I just want to be clear. Your all-in cost analysis did not presume that PSNC would have to interrupt service to its firm customers, did it?
Correct. No, it would not. That wouldn't even be remotely in the plan.
That's all I had.
All right. Mr. Neal, do you have a motion?
Yes, Commissioner Brown-Bland, at this time, I would move Mr. Lander's direct exhibits that have been marked for identification as GML1 through GML8 be entered into the record.
Without objection, those exhibits will be received into evidence.
Thank you. And I believe we already moved his testimony into the record. So,
and I do believe Mr. Lander also had some confidential material in at least one of his exhibits, so it will remain confidential.
I believe we did not leave any confidential information in any of his exhibits. I think we noted where in a response there had been some confidential information, but we left it out of the exhibit.
All right, and that's true of Exhibit 8 is the one I had made note of.
Yes.
All right. Okay. All right. Mr. Lander, you are excused. And Madam Court Reporter, do you need a break? All right. We'll go back to the company for a rebuttal. You're on mute.
Thank you, Commissioner Brown Bland. We would like to recall Ms. Rose Jackson for her rebuttal testimony. Good afternoon, Ms. Jackson.
Good afternoon.
Are you the same Ms. Jackson who provided direct testimony this morning?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you also cause to be pre-filed in this docket on August 5th, 2021 rebuttal testimony in question and answer form consisting of 9 pages?
Yes, ma'am.
Are there any corrections you would like to make to your rebuttal testimony at this time?
No, ma'am.
If I asked you the questions in your rebuttal testimony today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, ma'am, they would.
You have a summary of your rebuttal testimony.
Yes, ma'am, I do.
Would you please read it now?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My rebuttal testimony provides support for PSNC's best cost supply strategy and rebuts witness Lander's recommended all-in cost analysis. I begin by explaining how the best cost strategy is well established and, contrary to witness Lander's suggestions, considers least cost options as well as alternatives for meeting both current and future demand. I then explain how witness Lander's all-in cost analysis is based on hypothetical scenarios that ignore many real-world factors that PSNC must address in order to provide reliable natural gas service to firm customers. I conclude by explaining how the best cost supply strategy has consistently allowed PSNC to serve its firm customers reliably and cost effectively. This concludes the summary.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson. Commissioner Brown Bland, Ms. Jackson is available for cross-examination and questions from the commission.
All right, was there cross-examination on the rebuttal?
Yes, Commissioner Brown Bland. Should I proceed?
Yeah.
Thank you. Good afternoon now, Ms. Jackson.
Good afternoon.
Good to see you again. I'd first like to turn your attention to your rebuttal testimony on page 7, line 13. Is it still your testimony that witness Lander completely ignores reliability in his analysis?
Based on Mr. Lander's direct testimony, and it was difficult to follow how he calculated some of the numbers he utilized, because he did state that they were hypothetical or back of the envelope calculations. And based on the proposals he put forth, I do believe he ignored reliability.
I'd like to refer you to page 12 of the direct testimony of Mr. Lander. Do you have that in front of you?
Yes, sir. Page 12.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
If you could, for me, please read the question and first 2 sentences of his answer on lines 12 through 18.
Let's see, where it says, before you continue.
That's right.
Okay. The question states, before you continue, why did you use decatherm per hour as your measure? And you want me to read? I'm sorry.
The first 2 sentences of the answer, it goes from lines 14 through 18.
It says, because local distribution companies or LDCs typically experience their peak daily demand in 1 or more hours between 6 and 8 a.m. in the winter. And for that demand, LDCs have to make the gas be there when it is needed.
And then the next sentence.
It is not all right for gas needed at 7 a.m. to come at 12 noon.
And sorry, there's one more sentence there. I didn't see the period.
If it is needed at 7 a.m., it has to be there at 7 a.m. period.
Now, Ms. Jackson, you would agree that having gas when it is needed, right down to the hour it is needed, is an essential part of reliability of service for an LDC, right?
Reliability, well, when we look at reliability, we're typically looking at a gas day, but yes, we also consider where the peaks occur. But I think this was more consistent with looking at electric demand rather than LDC demand.
So you don't think his testimony where he talks about local gas distribution companies or LDCs, as he does on line 14, was referring to LDCs?
He's making a generalized statement that typically LDCs experience peaks between 6 and 8. We can also experience peaks in the evening hours as well.
But don't you agree that he also says that it's essential for the gas to be there at the hour, at the time it is needed? Isn't that right?
It says LDCs have to make the gas be there when it is needed.
Do you disagree with that statement?
No.
And would you agree that, as a general matter, an LDC that has entered into contracts for firm short-term peaking capacity that provide that company with assurance that it can meet its demand day requirements for the next 5 years has assured itself of more reliability than an LDC that has no contracts for required short-term peaking beyond the next year?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that again? That question again?
Sure, I know it's a long question, but just as a general matter, imagine an LDC that has entered into contracts for firm short-term peaking capacity that provide that company with some level of assurance that it can meet its demand day requirements for the next 5 years. So you've got that in your head?
Yes, sir.
That hypothetical? So wouldn't that LDC have assured itself of more reliability than one that had no contracts for required short-term peaking needs beyond the next year?
I think it will be dependent upon who the provider of that short-term winter peaking option would be. And so I think that goes into looking at what type of assets back up that winter peaking option. But I mean, that's a generalized statement, and I would have to see the details.
Well, are you generally familiar with PSNC's contract with a company known as EDF, or Électricité de France, or de France?
Yes. Yes, sir.
And I believe that's referenced on Creel Exhibit 1, Schedule 2 at line 32.
Yes, sir.
And you would agree that the EDF Trading FT reservation that's listed there, that's not for a pipeline company, is it?
No, sir. It's for a winter peaking option.
And EDF is a marketer, isn't that right?
Yes, they are.
And so they sell delivered gas to PSNC at your city gates using their contracted for firm transportation capacity, isn't that right?
Yes, sir, but they've been fully vetted by our credit department and our gas supply department. So that's all I'm stating, is that to make a hypothetical or generalized decision based on that, I would have to look at the details to state whether or not that would be a reliable source of supply.
And but you do think that your EDF contract is a reliable source of supply?
Yes, sir. It's a short-term contract. Yes, sir.
And going back to your direct exhibit 1, it shows, I believe for the 2020-2021 year, 40,000 decatherms per day in the category of short-term peaking services. Is that right?
Yes, sir. That's correct.
And the following year, again, at the time you filed for 2021-2022, it shows 24,000 decatherms per day. Is that right?
Yes, sir. That's correct.
And the years that follow, you would agree, 2022 to 2023, and there on out, there's nothing listed for those short-term peaking services. Is that right?
That's correct.
And if you would, please, can you turn back to Lander, Mr. Lander's direct testimony at page 21?
Okay.
And do you see where in response to the question, I think this is somewhere on line 22 or so, what other alternatives does PSNC have to meet its projected demand? Do you see that question?
Yes, sir.
And you see his response that specifically this is starting at line 23, specifically PSNC currently plans to contract for supply from a wholesale gas merchant or merchants, i.e. one or more producers or marketers, that holds capacity in its own name and agrees by contract to sell to PSNC when PSNC calls for deliveries of such contracted supply. Do you see that testimony?
Yes, sir.
And would you agree that Mr. Lander is referring to delivered service contracts, much like the EDF trading contract we discussed a moment ago?
Yes, sir.
And finally, could you turn to page 25 of Mr. Lander's direct testimony? Starting at line 11, there's a question with respect to reliance. Do you see that?
Yes, sir.
And I will have you read this whole thing, or you may, I guess, feel free to read it to yourself, but do you remember this exchange where he was asked with respect to reliance on merchant delivered gas contracts, what if they work 1 year, but the next the merchant decides to sell to someone else? Reading his response again to yourself, if you'd like, from lines 14 to 24, let me know when you're ready for the question.
Okay.
So would you agree that here Mr. Lander is testifying about entering into contracts for delivered service in staggered 5-year strips? Isn't that right?
That's what he appears to be suggesting. I will say that over the last 3 to 4 years, where we've been out in the marketplace trying to find delivered winter peaking options, there have been less and less parties willing to bid on that type of service. And the terms, when he says 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1 year terms, it is difficult to find anyone that's willing to go out beyond that 2-year term. I mean, since the time that we filed my Exhibit 1, we have a shortfall for this upcoming winter season of 60,000 decatherms, and we have only contracted for 55,000. We're continuing to solicit the market to find the remaining 5. And I think it's going to become even more difficult to find this type of service. Number one, demand is growing, especially in the Southeast. But number two, with less and less pipeline capacity being available, or new capacity being available in the marketplace, there are going to be less assets to provide this type of service. And I think the cost is going to go up because demand is going to go up.
And if you'll bear with me for one moment, you would agree in any event that a 5-year term, if you can get it, is longer than a 1 or 2 year term. Isn't that right?
Yes, sir.
I have no further questions.
All right. Are there questions by the public staff? All right. Ms. Holt indicates no. Redirect?
No redirect.
All right. Questions by the commission?
None here.
Commissioner McKissick, that was none from you as well?
That's correct.
All right, Ms. Jackson, for once, I don't have any questions. All right, so Ms. Do you have a motion for me?
Yes, ma'am. I move that Ms. Jackson's rebuttal testimony be copied to the record as if given orally from this stand.
That motion is
And,
allowed.
Thank you.
And she didn't have exhibits with the rebuttal, did she?
No, ma'am, she did not.
So we're good. So Ms. Jackson, you are excused. Anything else from the parties that outside of the proposed orders? Anything else? proposed orders good with everybody 30 days from the availability and posting and of the transcript?
Yes, Commissioner
ma'am.
Brown Bland.
That's fine.
All right, that'll be so ordered. And if there's nothing else to before you, us at this time, despite the surprises we had on the front end, I think we had a productive and good hearing. So again, thank you for your patience, and we will be adjourned.
Did an excellent job presiding over technical challenges.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bland, for putting up with us.
All
Yes,
right.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
One.